Okay, and let's get started with this drawing. See the pose? Now, in the very beginning, when I'm just getting started, tilt your head a tiny bit. I'm always trying to basically find some of my sort of largest compositional elements and largest sort of angular, like basically what's my longest line. And depending on how I sort of scale this, I'm going to come in here and say, okay, at the top of the head, let's put it about right there. And I'm generally setting the size of the head here, and generally where it's positioned on the paper. And I'm going to go ahead and triangulate not only the head, but the general gesture of the body as well. So it's basically, okay, what is the longest sort of general block-in shape of the head? Now my longest diagonal is actually from here all the way through. From basically the highest point on her hair all the way through to the shoulder. So if you can see, I'm really trying to block in the entire composition and simplify it into the largest key angles, and that's it in the beginning. Now in terms of scale, I also don't really want to go much larger than life size. I'm trying to keep it just around life size, maybe a tiny bit smaller. And there's not like a specific rule for this. I think it's just easier and more natural, unless you're intentionally enlarging things. It's also sometimes a little more difficult to work life size, but I think it's like a good way to generally practice and then know why you're deviating from that. And like this is a nice piece of charcoal to start with. It's not too hard. See how it's leaving lines without me pressing too hard. If you come in too aggressively with like a really hard piece of charcoal in the beginning, it can mess the paper up, basically. Can you turn your head towards me a little bit more? Yeah. Relax your shoulders just a bit. Yeah. Lower chin. And rotate your shoulders a little away from me. Lower chins to height. Thank you. And I really like that slightly downward tilt, and so I'm kind of setting the pose right now. I'm going to come in with the angle of the brows really quick as well. And I, keep moving around the whole piece. Trying to just keep things nice and simple. Now I'm basically trying to find from my longest angles, I'm basically trying to find my largest shapes. And so it's basically you're coming in from these very sort of general angular gestural elements, and then you have to sort of start to define sort of the shapes. And the shapes, you know, the biggest shape is the shape of the whole head and body. And then the next biggest shape is going to be the larger shapes of shadows versus shapes of light. And so I'm not quite in the light and shadow stage yet. I'm still trying to find the entire gesture and sort of the entire shape of the whole head. I'm also thinking about the direction of the head, where she's facing, things like that. Because anytime you're working from life, you know, the model's going to move, it's going to sort of shift into the pose, things like that. And so there's a lot of sort of difficult challenges in working from life, but there's also sort of the unique element of seeing all these slightly different versions of the same pose, which allows you to make a lot more choices, and it leads to just more interesting drawing, in my opinion. Tilt your head a little bit more, and lower your chin just here. Now, I try to take as much time as necessary for these earlier stages, because if you do a good job blocking everything in, the rest of the drawing can, or painting for that matter, sort of feels effortless. If you don't do a good job blocking things in, it's like pulling teeth the entire process. And so I think it's really important to almost set yourself up for success. And so if you think about it, what is a good start? A good start is something that will give you a chance to have a good finished result. And it doesn't mean that you will. I've had great starts that ended up being shit drawings. But at least in theory, sort of the more time you take to like really prep and set things up, the more you sort of reap the rewards of that later on. Now, I also usually draw with like a solid backdrop. With this one, I'm just kind of working into the room. It's interesting atmospherically, but it kind of brings a little bit of a challenge of the outside shape. It's a little harder to see. So I'm going to just kind of try to take a little bit of time and make sure that that's generally working. This is my wife, by the way, Emma, our beautiful model for the day. BT Dubs, my quarantine buddy. You can't laugh though, you're a model. She doesn't know that, but you can't really laugh as a model. You're not really supposed to make the model laugh as someone who's drawing either, but I'm used to working with professionals. You can't laugh. Okay. Yeah, she doesn't take directional, but. Lower your chin a bit, and then tilt your head that way. Yeah, thank you. So at this point, I'm not really coming in and actually like clearly defining the features. I'm just sort of trying to find the general position of the features in relation to each other in order to set the position of the head. So since I'm sitting lower down, I think I need to raise some of this stuff up a little bit. I think this is going to come up a bit here. This is going to come up a little bit over here. So see how instead of actually defining the nose or defining the features, I'm more moving the sort of most general version of the features around in order to find the relative position in relationship to each other, not clearly define what the features are doing themselves. That's not the close, Emma.
I know.
Are you checking questions?
I got kicked off the live, so all the questions for me disappeared. They'll be on your phone, which we can go through.
Cool. Lower your chin a bit, and then tilt your head a little bit. And again, I'm just moving through, triangulate some shapes. Again, it's not about any specific thing at this point, it's more about the relative relationships of things. Again, I'm not clearly defining the ear, more finding where the ear is in relationship to the face and head. Lower your chin, please. A little bit. Thank you. Now, I intentionally kind of block things in a little bit larger, and then I kind of come in on them a little bit because I like the atmosphere. Relax your shoulders. Yeah, thank you. And we'll take a break soon, at least so I can check the live stream, make sure it's actually going. And see how I'm basically just circling the drawing and just kind of going over very similar sort of decisions, just kind of making the margin of error just a little bit tighter. So I'm kind of guesstimating and then making a second guess and a third guess and a fourth guess, and then eventually it starts to get a little bit clearer. Turn your head towards what's diffraction, thank you. And the tilt just. Again, see how I'm not focusing on the focal points quite yet, but just really trying to block the whole thing in. And that's probably the most important thing too, starting a drawing. Forget about the details, forget about what you want to do. And let's take a quick break. You can stretch out, just remember where you're looking and sitting. Basically, this initial block-in is really one of the most important things. And like when I'm teaching live, like most of the first few classes is really spent just practicing this. I'm actually completely rusty. For full info, I haven't done one of these block-ins in like a year probably because I've been so focused on paintings for galleries and things like that. But it's really, really, really important and very, very, just one of the most important things, yeah.
What kind of lighting equipment do you use?
Lighting equipment just depends. Right now we're using an LED panel that has a dimmer on it. And this is actually the first time I've used it for life drawing. I used to use like the big Hollywood Fresnel lights that are super warm, like a spotlight. I also use natural light sometimes. So it really depends on what I'm doing. When I'm shooting references, I use natural light because I just like the way natural light works best with photography. When I'm doing, charcoal blocking, I actually like a lot more of a spotlight. So it really depends.
What charcoal hardness did you begin with?
All of these are the H, which is the hard. And that's why I have so many of them. Some are too hard. And so what I'm looking for, this one actually might be a medium because the label's gone. But the blues are hards and the orange is medium. And then this is just a mystery piece of charcoal that happens to work well.
Oh, my friend Sydney. Hi, Sydney.
And then you'll sort of see, like a lot of questions that I usually get is how do I get like that sort of loose atmospheric quality to my drawings combined with some of the tighter detail areas. And you can kind of see that going on here, where I'm starting with just these largest lines, and some of this is going to come through even in the finished piece. And so it's really about putting enough energy into the start and really getting those large elements working so that you can then tighten in on specific areas and still have some of that larger energy.
Eric asks, when did you begin studying with your father?
When I was about 8 is when I started studying with him. He had an illustration school in Southern Oregon. So I was like the little child in a grown-up school. It was interesting. I never thought it was weird, but now that I'm a little older, I realize that it's unusual. But yeah, my dad started me as soon as I showed interest in drawing. And then he was like, okay, I got to school. And I was like, yes, please.
Hi, Chris. Okay, talk about working from your shoulder.
Working from my shoulder?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
It says talk about working from your shoulder for the kiddos at home.
Is the question about sort of the larger movements that I'm doing with my arm versus wrist, or are you talking about, is that the question? If that's the question, if you think about the largest line, I am using my shoulder instead of the wrist because I'm making a line from here to here. And so if I was to do this, it would be a small line, whereas I can actually come in and put a line all the way through, which allows me to pay attention to these larger things. I usually actually draw standing up. It's easier to demo sitting down so that I don't move too much and shake the floor and the camera. But you're basically coming in with the longest angles, and I actually tend to use my entire body when I make these strokes. And the more sort of energy you put into it, I think the more energy the drawing has, and so that's where that's coming from.
What kind of, do you have a charcoal eraser? Is that a thing?
So this is a kneaded eraser, and it's kind of like a Zen little fidget cube, as well as a customizable eraser. So I use the eraser almost as much as the charcoal, and I'll make like what I call like an axe blade with it, and see how I can actually hatch with the eraser and make similar marks, but they're reductive instead of additive. With it.
What kind of brand of charcoal is it?
It's Nitram, which is kind of hard to pronounce. I don't know if you guys see this really good. I will make a post with the finished drawing and the materials used after this, and so you'll have it all typed up for you and easy to go.
Hi, Bill. He asked if you're going to sit for a photograph after.
Me?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. But I might take a picture of Emma because she looks pretty.
What kind of paper are you using?
It's Canson Mi-Teintes. It's a weird. Let me see if I have a label. Again, I'll make a post about it. I don't have an actual sticker over here, but it's a pretty standard paper that you can get at almost any art supply store. I ordered a 10-pack from Jerry's Artorama. Super easy to get, and it's not super pricey. I think it goes like about $2, $2.50 a sheet. And it's just basically kind of like a little bit of a softer sheet of paper. One thing is the paper's got a smooth side and a rough side, and I'm actually using the smooth side. And then we'll do another Q&A in like 20 minutes, so stay tuned to that.
Just one more. As someone who draws directly the model, what do you think about photographing the model and drawing from the photograph?
So, really common question, really good question. They're both valid for different purposes. I've improved more than anything from doing these live drawing exercises. I've been able to transfer some of that knowledge and understanding into working with photo references, which I do pretty consistently when it comes to finished paintings. But it's for different reasons. And I've been missing this, and I've almost felt like I've gotten rusty with a certain. This is like cardio. There's different ways of doing things and different skill sets. But at the end of the day, if you stop running, your cardio goes, down. And if you don't draw from life at all, eventually you'll realize that you've gotten worse. Or if you try to learn from photos, you're not going to learn as much as if you work from life. That being said, I work from photography all the time, and so there's nothing wrong with it. It's more in the sense of just understanding the limitations of photography and understanding what you need to do from life and how much you need to learn from life in order to be able to subsidize the information in the photos. So after a break, and we just took, let's say, like a 5-minute break, it's usually, or almost always, a good idea to see what you can adjust without adding new information because you have a fresh eye. And so generally, like, let's say you stare at the same drawing for however long, you walk away from it, then you come back to it. And so for a little bit, you basically have a fresh perspective because you just, took a little time off. And so with that fresh perspective, you want to sort of see if you can spot issues at the stage that you're at. Or if you don't want to sort of frame it with negative light, see how you can improve what you already have on the page, not what else you can add to the page. And what does that mean? That means, let's say, larger proportion, angles, shapes. You're checking things and solidifying things at the stage that they're at versus moving forward. Turn your head towards me just a tiny bit. Lower your chin. A fraction more tilt. Now, especially when I'm checking things, usually when I adjust the model the most, just to sort of make sure that things are in the right position. And remember, guys, for anybody that's sort of joining us later, I will do a Q&A every 20 minutes or so once we take breaks. So when we're doing that, feel free to ask any questions. Right now I'm not monitoring the phone, so if you are asking questions, I'm just not seeing them. And see how I'm still spending most of my time triangulating the position of things relative to each other, all these different features. Let's say, where is the ear? Is it higher or lower than the brow? How much higher or lower? Those are the questions that I'm looking for, or those are the answers I'm looking for, or those are the questions I'm trying to answer, however you want to think about it. Rotate your head towards me this time. Thank you. And for the record, guys, as easy as Emma is making it look, posing actually is kind of difficult and a pain in the ass. So let's give Emma a little silent applause. I'm mostly just making her laugh. There's some truth to what I'm saying though, too. That stuff. So this is, let's call this the initial block-in stage, which is basically like getting just everything positioned on the paper, and you're basically deciding the position of the head, the general perspective, like let's say like this angle here. Let's extend this because that is giving me the angle of my brow. Right? And then all parallel lines go to the same vanishing point. So for instance, this here, let's say the bottoms of her eyes, all parallel lines are going to the same vanishing point. And so even this over here is going to join that. Now when I come into the, triangulating where the mouth is, I'm actually going to start with just finding that angle before I even get into the details of the mouth. because I'm trying to make sure that the general perspective is working first and foremost. And so see how I'm even adjusting these lines a little bit to sort of find that angle. Straighten your head up tiny bit more. It's too much. Yeah. Turn your head towards you. Stay here. Perfect. And lower your chin. One more. And that's why I'm sort of adjusting her especially when I'm looking for those vanishing points, because once you set these angles and you make sure that they're all sort of connected, that's going to really help anchor the drawing. Rotate away from you, stay here. Perfect. Lower your chin. I usually say perfect and then I correct someone again, so bear with me. Now, after these general angles, I'm going to start coming in and actually thinking about my shadow shapes a little bit more specifically. And this stage actually takes some time. And so I try to keep myself away from it as long as I can almost, so that when I do come in and start thinking about the shadow shapes, I'm almost like morally validated to do so, because I, didn't rush it. Because if you rush it and you get into the shadow shapes too prematurely, it usually ends up being one of those situations where your drawing has entirely too much detail on it, but something's off in the larger relationships, and you don't want that. I forgot how much I like doing this. People ask me, how did I learn, or how did I develop my style? You're looking at it. Only difference between today's drawing and normal: A, I'm rusty, and B, this model happens to just smile a lot. See? So I'm making the shit out. Just unprofessional. A little bit this way and tilt. Lower chin just tiny bit, right there. And now I'm actually starting to consider more of the nuance of the shape. So from one more simplified line, I'm now breaking it up into, let's say, 2 or 3 lines, and then I'm building a shape out of that as well. And so this is where a lot of the sort of the chaos turns into something that's a little bit clearer. Now I also start lighter, and then the more specific I get with the shadow shapes, the more basically the darker I go. That helps me sort of also kind of separating approximation from permanence. Lower your chin a bit. And now find the spot that you were looking at. And I also like a little bit tight, you know, if I work a little bit tighter for a second, I want to also like, again, zoom back out, throw my eye back and forth and start moving around so that I don't hyper focus on any specific area. That's where you kind of lose track of larger perspective, is when you start to favor a specific area too much. Fill in of this hair with a bit of a base value. Now again, I don't like doing this too early. Right now I'm separating some of these largest shapes. Lower your chin just a bit. I'll lower your chin some more. And tilt tiny more. Yes, thank you. And again, see how I moved that, move it again, move it a third time? That's really, I think, the most important sort of thing to be aware of is you're not trying to make it accurate in one pass, at least in this approach. I'm narrowing my margin of error, so I'm starting with my first guess, and then second, and then third, and then fourth, and then fifth. And then by the time I get into sort of nitpicking and adjusting subtleties, I've already built on so many different versions or so many guesses on top of each other, and so it kind of becomes something that you really guessed, you're checked and checked again. I think it's a fun way to work too. Now I'm also thinking about the larger form right now, starting to anyway, because up till here it's mostly been just kind of flat shapes and general perspective, whereas now I'm thinking about the volume a little bit more. And again, see how I also use the eraser as a drawing tool, same way as the charcoal. It's not to eliminate mistakes. Well, it is as well, but it's also to adjust things. And so when you're simplifying, you're making something that needs to be adjusted eventually. And so the way you actually work from larger simplifications into slightly more specific forms is a lot of where I think style comes from, because representational work demands simplification in the beginning in order to really make things generally work. But then if you want a high level of finish, then eventually you're going to have to take that general block and turn it into something a lot more specific. Turn your head towards me. Lower your chin. A little bit more. And then a little more tilt. Thank you. Again, I went back there, and I'm going to come into the features a little bit more. So let's keep them focused. Now over here, I'm looking at some of this back edge a lot because it is part of her largest outside shape. And the distance between the back cheek and the nose, also like see how small that shape distance is? That's what I'm actually using to triangulate her exact position. And so I'm trying to make this area work generally before I find this cheekbone a little bit more, because if I was to come in and then move this, then I'd have to move this as well. Turn your head towards me, just yeah, lower chin. Thank you. Lower chin. Perfect. And generally, I set the nose before the mouth. It's more central, doesn't move. And remember, vanishing points. So if this is going this way, I need to make sure that's generally going in that same direction. Now from here, I'm going to triangulate sort of where this outside of the mouth is. And then I'm going to sort of go through my spacing. So if this is here, this is here, the bottom of her upper lip is approximately over here. Where is the bottom of the bottom lip? And then what is this shadow shape here? And so before I get super specific with those shapes, I'm really just kind of placing them generally. And then I'm gonna make her laugh a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So I can get the corners of the mouth. There's a reason for that sometimes as well. We're working from life. It allows you to choose the relative position. Because features shift and change and move and morph and all kinds of stuff. We're not made of plastic. Well, at least some of us aren't. And so expression is, probably one of the most interesting parts of drawing and painting humans. We're very sort of familiar with human expression. Turn your head towards me, just a little bit. Lower chin. One more tilt. And again, just because I'm working in one area doesn't mean I'm fixating in that area. I still want to move and relate it to other parts. I just put this in when I saw that the nose needed to be clipped on this side a little bit, which will push this over just a tiny bit here, which might push this. And so, all these parts relate to each other. And so in the beginning, you really want to focus on relating the parts to each other, and then once they're connected, you can then really sink into the specifics of the different parts. Tilt your head a tiny bit more. Lower your chin. Lower chin. Toe chin. Relax your shoulders. Lower your chin. Okay, let's go take a quick break, answer some more questions, and then we will keep going with this.
Did you do a lot of quick pose life drawings when you were learning?
Yes. Many. I have proof.
Hi, sweet Hannah. Can you please give a brief description of triangulation?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So when I'm talking about triangulating, let's put it this way, like an eye could be drawn here, 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 anywhere really, and it could be a well-drawn eye. Triangulation is where this general shape is in relationship, let's say, to this point, and this point, and this point, and this point. So what I'm basically saying, like for instance, I had approximately where my nose was, and then I triangulated this by coming in from both the vanishing point and from this corner of the nose, as well as how this relates to where the eye is. And so what I'm actually doing is I'm relating sort of these different parts to each other, and that's why I'm leaving them in a very simplified, loose stage, so that then I can basically triangulate these different parts to each other, and then they become more anchored. Like for instance, this nose is a lot more sort of specific than it was at the very beginning. I just, made it more accurate by cutting off some of this side. And so what I mean by triangulating is making sure that it checks out. It's almost like a logical proof. It's like, okay, if this distance to this distance is working, this is where this should be, right? And then I have this distance working here, or let's say this to here. You can basically find some of these more detailed areas by relating them to these anchor points, which I kind of, this is what I mean by triangulating, is really the relative relationship of these different parts to each other.
Did you begin your training as a painter with color or monochromatic?
Monochromatic. I drew for like 2 years full time in my dad's school before I painted. And then when I started painting, I decided I hated it and I quit painting for like 6 months. And then I started up again, obviously.
You move your head like a bird, which is not a question. It's just something I really like because I call him the Raven. So I like it.
Yeah, I've gotten that since I was like 12. Bird of prey.
People are loving the bird sounds in the background.
Yeah, it's actually, we're downtown LA, but those are real. We've got a bridge over here and the birds hang out right under it, and they make noises, they wake us up. It's all kind of awesome.
Hello, beautiful Doris Warren. You draw with charcoal, question mark.
I draw with all kinds of shit. Draw with pencil, draw with charcoal, sometimes draw with pen, acrylic. A lot of oil painting that I do is also drawing. What I think about as drawing is everything but color.